Welcome to today's session of ISTAT Online. Thank you for your time and interest in the ISTAT Foundation. It is great to see so many ISTAT members joining us today, and we have a very interesting session. Also, thank you very much for your support in the ISTAT Foundation. We as the ISTAT Foundation are very keen to give back to the industry. We're also dedicated to give back to our industry, and we do this with several programs that we have. And we're going to share some stories on those today. We have two streams in the foundation. One is called Human Capital Development, and that includes our scholarship program, ISTAT University, and the internship program. The other stream is grants, where we have educational grants and humanitarian grants. The chair of the Humanitarian Committee is Richie Wall. Richie has joined us in about a year ago, and he has a great committee and even more great stories to share. So with that, I would like to hand over to Richie to introduce this panel with great speakers. And I look forward to see you again on our next sessions talking about the other programs on the ISTAT Foundation. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks to the Foundation and thanks to the ISTAT board. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk here today about the work we've been doing over the last period of time. As part of this, we'll hear firsthand from some of the partners we have tied up with, and we will listen to some of their stories and how the aid kind of works in reality. So much of what we do is about raising awareness, and thank you for us being able to help them in giving that aid. First, and most importantly, I'd like to thank the team that work with us. We have a group of very, very dedicated volunteers that work as part of the ISTAT Humanitarian Aid Committee. I would like to thank David Swan, the outgoing chair, for his involvement, for pulling me into it and getting me involved and now taking over. So I'm looking forward to bringing this on to the next level. We're proud to help ISTAT keep its place as a responsible corporate citizen. And this is very important from our point of view in being able to assist that. The ISTAT Humanitarian Aid Program, it uses the power of aviation to save lives, promote human welfare, and alleviate suffering around the world. And this is very important. And we do this through offering grants to a number of different organizations. And these grants tend to be in or around $10,000, and they're focused on aviation-related projects, non-profit organizations from around the globe. In addition to the discretionary funding, we've also had a long-standing partnership with Airlink, and combined since 2010, we've actually been able to give over $3.17 million to worthy causes globally. This is a fabulous kind of feat of generosity from ISTAT and the community. In 2020 alone, we were awarded $125,000, which we actually dispersed to 15 recipients across the globe. And this is outside of the Airlink grant. So later on in these presentations, we'll give you a little bit more information on what we're actually doing with Airlink. So stay tuned for that. It's very important. Last year was a phenomenal year in terms of just need around the world. COVID-19 had an impact running through the whole year, but we got a special grant from the ISTAT Foundation and from the ISTAT main board, and we'd like to thank them for that. There was an extra $500,000 allocated to us, which in the space of 12 weeks, we reallocated to 12 needy causes around the world. And I'd like to thank the subcommittee that was responsible for donating that. It was a fascinating project to be involved in and one that was very worthy. Just to give you a sense of where we're working around the world, we touch people on every continent. We have involvement on frontline operations in many, many different countries around the world. It's a truly global effort and getting funding to where it's needed most. And these recipients have often been introduced by ISTAT members. So it's very important for us to have that contact with the group within ISTAT. In 2021, we will be evolving how we actually give to our recipients. And we'll be focusing on a number of newer aspects. One is to actually focus on the less developed parts of the world. It's something we've always done, but we're increasing the level of focus on that. Our second consideration is looking at where we can actually impact projects that are aviation related with a positive effect on ESG. So looking at the environmental impact of trying to help, and particularly where this is impacted by the last mile delivery. So getting the aid to the people who need it most. And the third aspect we'd like to introduce this year is introducing gender diversity and impact. And this is going to be very important as we evolve our platform going forward. So how do people apply? Applying for aid is actually quite simple. People can log onto the internet, onto the ISTAT website at istat.org and follow the links through there. There are a number of deadlines through the year, so we're starting to gather potential recipients now, and that will focus through the summer with the deadline being the 1st of September. And that will be when the final decisions are made on allocations of resources. So any organizations that are registered charities, that are non-governmental entities, focusing on aviation humanitarian, either prevention, relief, or disaster recovery efforts, are eligible for support from our funds. And we're happy to talk to anyone to see if they qualify. So thank you for your attention. It's a very important project from our point of view, and it's very, very interesting for us to stay involved in that. And I'd like to introduce our next presentation. So, sorry, just bear with me 1 sec. So Gabriella Morris is the Chief Philanthropy Officer of the World Food Program, USA. Gabriella is a passionate and strategic nonprofit and business leader with decades of experience in complex legal, corporate and nonprofit organizations. She is currently the Chief Philanthropy Officer of the World Food Program USA, where she leads all aspects of the philanthropy, fundraising and partnership development on behalf of the United Nations World Food Program. The work of the organization was recently recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to combat hunger, bettering conditions for peace, and preventing the use of hunger as a weapon of war. So thank you, Gabriella, and please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you so much, Richie, for your kind introduction. And I am so pleased to be with you today, and thank you to the ISTAT Foundation for having us here. I am, as Richie mentioned, Gabriella Morris, the Chief Philanthropy Officer of the World Food Program, USA. We're here headquartered in Washington, D.C. We're a nonprofit organization, and we are the U.S. affiliate of the United Nations World Food Program, the world's largest humanitarian agency addressing global hunger, and the 2020 Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Our team here in D.C. supports the vital functions of the World Food Program, including raising funds, vital support, creating partnerships, and working to inform and educate U.S. policymakers on the work of the World Food Program and our mission of working with and for the hungriest people around the world through food and resilience programs. So let me take a few minutes to tell you something about the mission of the World Food Program and what we do on a daily basis. We do, as I say, work with the poorest of the poor, the hungriest of the hungry, and people living on less than $2 a day. Who are these people? They're people like you. They're people like me. It's the mother who wants food for her child, who wants access to education, and what's the best health care possible for her child. It's a farmer in South Sudan who is concerned about his crops that have been decimated by drought, by locusts. It's children who their only meal of the day might be from a school meal provided by the World Food Program. The World Food Program operates the largest school meal program in the world. And it's the refugee in Cox's Bazar who uses a debit card received from the World Food Program to buy groceries and supplies for his family with dignity. So in 2020, the World Food Program reached out and served 138 million people. Now, as hunger increases around the world and resources are diminished, this year we intend to reach 120 million. So you can see right there, there's an incredible gap in needs and resources available to the neediest people in the most fragile circumstances in the world. On any given day, there are 20,000 colleagues from World Food Program working on our mission. We have maybe 5,600 trucks, 30 ships, and nearly 100 aircraft planes on the move in service of our mission. So I mentioned that we're the largest humanitarian organization. Let me give a little more background on exactly what that means. Unfortunately, we are facing the greatest hunger crisis of our time. Hunger is on the rise. Nearly 250 million people are marching toward starvation as we speak. And without relief, these people will surely die. 155 million people are without food. That's about the size of the population of Australia. So the problem really is not food supply. The problem is access and availability to food. Now, there are several key drivers of hunger and famine that contribute to this. Conflict or war, number one. Extreme weather events and climate shocks and food loss and gender inequality. Women eat last, they eat the least. So I'd like to stop here for a minute and give you a snapshot of a day in the life, a view of how your support and funding power helps us in our mission. Let's take a look.
The Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize to the World Food Program for its efforts to combat hunger, for its contribution to bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas, and for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict.
As you can see, the UN World Food Program is the world's first responder. Our staff's on the front line, doing whatever it takes to deliver food and humanitarian supplies wherever it's needed. It's worth noting that 2/3 of World Food Program staff are operating in conflict areas. Every day, I think about their heroism in helping others to survive. The World Food Program employs the most effective tools to reach the most vulnerable, whether that be a convoy of trucks, a chartered fleet of ships, or amphibious vehicles, really delivering food and supplies across the most rugged terrain on the planet. The World Food Program is known as the logistics background of the UN for good reason. We operate the world's humanitarian airline, the United Nations Humanitarian Air Service, or as it's known, UNHAS. It provides passenger service for the entire humanitarian community. They respond when there's no safe surface transport or viable commercial aviation options, and this happens during times of natural disaster, conflict, or even now, a global pandemic. During the pandemic, commercial aviation came to a halt, and UNHAS was authorized to deliver critical medical cargo, including PPE and other supplies, through our transportation networks in sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, and Latin America. And now we've developed additional regional hubs in Syria, Burkina Faso, and Mozambique. So I want to take this opportunity now just to touch on a few ways that ISTAT Foundation and ISTAT members have assisted in these critical missions. So first, I'd like to touch on South Sudan. in 2018, incredible flooding really devastated access by roads across the region. And through ISTAT and its financial support, we were able to airdrop 44,000 pounds of something called Super Cereal Plus, which is a highly nutritious supplement made from corn and soybean paste, especially formulated to treat and prevent malnutrition in children from 6 months old to 2 years old. We were able to feed 2,000 children for an entire month. So we are very grateful to ISTAT for that support. In 2019, just an incredible cyclone in the region of Mozambique, tropical cyclone Idai. This is an incredible story. Winds were exceeding 105 miles an hour. And this was a storm that was not detected on weather maps for 2 days, until 2 days before it struck, which did not leave the country sufficient time to be prepared for the ensuing disaster. So almost immediately, 500,000 people were stranded and without food. And you can tell from the picture how water isolated communities. This was an interesting case where we were able to use drone technology to locate people, to immediately deliver high energy biscuits until people could be relocated and properly fed. So once again, thanks to ISTAT for responding in an emergency humanitarian situation. Lastly, let me touch on impacts from COVID-19. Wow, there's such progress had been made across that region, Latin America and the Caribbean, in reducing hunger. But with the onset of COVID-19, we saw an increase of over 269% year over year in hunger, people facing incredible food insecurity in the region. But thanks to ISTAT's financial support, we were able to fund a flight from Shanghai to Caracas and make a delivery of over 200,000 pounds of critical supplies that allowed humanitarian aid workers to help in the fight against COVID, but also to continue our mission of attending to people in severe hunger. So I want to thank you once again for all of the people like you and I, that the World Food Program has a mission to help in the critical area of combating hunger and food shortage across the globe. So thank you so much, Richie. Thank you, ISTAT, and your members.
And thank you, Gabriella. Your message and your video were very powerful. Thanks for delivering them for us. If it's okay with you, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions before we wrap up. Firstly, why is the support of ISTAT and the ISTAT Foundation members of significance to the World Food Program and the efforts that you make?
For so many reasons, Richie. Contributions to the World Food Program are voluntary. And though governments have historically supported our mission, we're at a critical phase now. We are about $5.5 billion off of the supplies and the resources we need to reach the critical mass. We know that ISTAT understands the power of aviation, especially these instances, and we talked about humanitarian aid being able to be dropped into places that are inaccessible. I think ISTAT and its members understand that, and that sometimes time means everything when we are addressing critical crises. So thank you for that.
Okay. And the second question is, we're kind of living in a time of growing disparity between the developed world and the less developed economies around the world. So how can we prevent millions from dying from starvation?
Thank you, because it's becoming a more enormous task daily. I would say number one, conflict. I mean, I don't want to sound naive, but certainly creating peace across the world would go quite far in alleviating disparities and hunger around the world. The second part is helping us to get to places that are currently inaccessible to us, whether because of geography or politics. Survival of people depends upon our ability to reach them. And, that's the beauty of working with ISTAT, and you understand the importance of accessibility. And the third is the funding question. To get back to it, it does take enormous amount of resources to reach people. And those are the things I would cite as things that we possibly could do to alleviate some of this suffering.
Thank you. Interesting insight. And finally, I just want to ask you two more questions. I think our audience will be very interested to understand your perspective. As the population is rising globally. Could you just kind of take a little bit of time to tell us exactly kind of what is global food insecurity? What does that actually mean? And why should we as a population be aware of it?
I think that the simplest way for me to think about insecurity is, do you know where your next meal is coming from? And for countless people across the globe, they do not. I think some of us in the developed world did see the impact of COVID-19 when we saw lines of people at food banks because they were insecure. They didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Now imagine we're not in a developed world where we can get in our car and drive up to a food bank and get food. So this is the situation across the world. People don't know where their next meal is coming from. And as I said, let me emphasize, 34 million people are on the edge of famine in proportions we've never seen before. So, we study this to see where the needs are. We just released our Hunger Hotspots report in March, showing 20 countries across the planet that are in dire need and are with vast populations of people who are starving. We know right now in Yemen, South Sudan, Madagascar, we're near famine conditions, and there are more. So, I hope that the terrible situation we've experienced gives us empathy and insights into what it must be like to not know where your next meal is coming from.
I think that is really an important message for us all to understand, and one that we've seen locally as part of COVID. But it's a terrible situation for people to be in. I think at that point, I think we'll close it at that. Gabriella, thank you very much for giving us your time today. It's been an important insight from our point of view, and we look forward to keeping the partnership going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we thank you and your members for your support.
So what I would like to do is just to introduce our next speaker. Naomi Lehrer is the philanthropy manager at the Royal Flying Doctor Service in Australia. She's been with the organization for 5 years and considers it a privilege to be working alongside the supporters, the funders, and other people who are passionate about healthcare of people in Australia who live and work in rural parts of the country. Over to you, Naomi.
Hello, my name is Naomi Lehrer from the Royal Flying Doctor Service Victoria. I'm the philanthropy manager, and I'm delighted to be with you today, and I thank ISTAT and Richie for the opportunity. I'd like to show you a short video on the history and where we are with the Royal Flying Doctor Service Victoria. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video of the Royal Flying Doctor Service. It's quite ironic that 1 week ago today was the first flight of the Royal Flying Doctor Service. It was the 18th of May in 1918. So 93 years later, we are, still needed and still required as much, if not more, today than we were then. You can see by the technology in this slide that the aircraft was very basic. Today, it looks more like an aircraft, a commercial aircraft, where the technology has improved greatly, as has the comfort to the patient. We are an enormous country with a very small population. There are 8 million people living in rural and remote communities around Australia. And this slide is just to give you an example of the size of Australia. We are an enormous land mass, but a very, very small population. And that's where the need for the Royal Flying Doctor Service is, that we need to reach so many people in very, very hard places to find. We've had to overcome the tyranny of distance, and that is still relevant today. We have 23 bases across Australia. We have 77 aircraft, and we are roughly servicing a person every 2 minutes. So we have contacts with over 330,000 people per year, and that requirement, if anything, is getting larger and larger each year. People in the country have to overcome the barrier of distance in order to access healthcare. But with our bases and our aircraft, we can be anywhere, usually in 2 hours or less. And this is life-saving to people who suffer accidents or farming accidents, road accidents, they're the main ones, and health problems, of course. And that's the need for the Royal Flying Doctor Service. So we are delivering clinics like you see in this one. We take dental clinics, nursing clinics, antenatal clinics. We have vaccination for antenatal care. We have all different types of GPs, nurses delivering healthcare. Reverend John Flynn had a vision of the Royal Flying Doctor Service of taking healthcare to the people, because he knew people couldn't come to the cities to access doctors, nurses and specialists. So that's what we do today, and that's where the need is, if not greater. We have a lot of people living in very, very remote communities. Our First Nations people are living in some of the most remote locations in the world, and they are some of the people that we serve on a daily basis. It is 1.8 times more likely to die or be in an accident in a rural or remote community compared to that of the city, which makes the need for the Royal Flying Doctor Service so great. We have to be able to land our aircraft in a space of 500 metres or less, which is why we have very specialised aircraft that are made mainly in Switzerland by Pilatus. And we often use our roads and freeways to land our planes, or we use homesteads and farms where they have specially maintained land masses to enable our aircraft to land. There are around 8 million people, obviously pre-COVID, who come to Australia, and many people like to adventure out into very remote communities, and they're some of the people that we need to help if they get into trouble. Especially when you consider we have our wet season from October to May, and people who may not be used to the Australian climate will four-wheel drive or get into all sorts of strife, and hopefully with a satellite phone they're able to join to connect with us to an emergency line, and then we're able to help people. Here in Victoria, we're growing our range of services. We are quite a small state. We have 6 sections of the Royal Flying Doctor Service, and here in Victoria, whilst we don't have an enormous landmass, we still have communities living in very remote and rural communities, and we need to deliver eye care and GP services and education and community transport where people don't have access to healthcare. So we'll pick them up with a range of volunteer services in cars donated by our donors and our supporters. And we're enabling people to reach their healthcare appointments, even if they're not in the absolute remote parts of Australia. If they can't connect to healthcare, they're just as isolated as someone who's living in the very outback. Here is a map of all our bases from all over Australia. There are 23 of them. We have extraordinary communication between the bases so that we can get to patients who are in trouble in the quickest possible way, which gives them the maximum opportunity for the best case survival. We're very grateful to organisations such as the ISTAT Foundation for their continued support. It's this sort of support that enables us to reach people no matter where they are, whether they're travelling, whether they're tourists or whether they're locals, to access the healthcare that we believe and that John Flynn believed everybody deserves no matter where they're located.
It was a great presentation. I'm really delighted that ISTAT Humanitarian and ISTAT Foundation can be a partner with the Royal Flying Doctor Service. So thank you for sharing that information with us. It's fascinating. It resonates quite a lot with me because I started my career in search and rescue in air ambulances. And although it was in Ireland, I understand some of the issues that you'll be facing in rural areas. So if you don't mind, what I'd like to do is maybe just ask you a couple of questions and just have a little chat.
Absolutely.
I suppose the first question from my point of view, Naomi, is the first time I went to Australia and I flew across the landmass, I just was astounded by the size of the continent, and 6 hours of flying and you're still flying across red ground. Yeah. So, you know, the physical distance between the towns, how does the organization coordinate with all the different stations that you have to deliver effective services over such a vast expanse?
So, I mean, technology has come so far, so it's so much easier now. It used to be, when we started, by pedal radio, which Alfred Tregear invented for John Flynn all those 90 plus years ago. But now with satellite phones and, you know, technology now enables such ease of communication between the bases. They're all constantly in touch with one another. And there's actually a flight path that you can follow so you can see where our aircraft are at any time. But the communication between the bases is really key. It's what's enabled and has saved so many people's lives. So it's telephone, it's through the PC, it's through email, but it's an incredible system that we've developed that's specifically to the Royal Flying Doctor Service, that enables instant communication no matter where people are.
So a huge change over the 93 years. So you've started off with a basic service. It's now a very complex service, but where does it go to next? Like, where is the next step for the Royal Flying Doctors?
Sure. So what we've seen in the last few years, and especially exacerbated by COVID-19 last year, is so much is now done through telehealth. So, you know, where we can communicate with people and see people as I'm seeing you, whether they're in, you know, in an outback estate in the middle of, you know, 100,000 acre homestead in the Northern Territory, or you're in a little town, you know, 2 hours out of Melbourne. Telehealth has enabled so much more communication, and we're delivering a lot of our health services if we don't need to touch a patient through telehealth. But really, it's for us, it's about asking health professionals to relocate to the smaller rural communities so that then they are much closer to, you know, if it's a 1 or 2 hour drive rather than driving from a capital city. So for us, it's about encouraging people to live in remote and rural communities and then to service those communities near to them. So that's why it's really a combination of asking professionals to live in rural communities and also the telehealth platform, and the technology enables us to help one another so much more easily.
Okay. And can I ask you one last question?
Sure, of course.
So on the philanthropy side, so, you know, how important is philanthropy in delivering quality services? And has it been significantly impacted in the context of COVID-19? Has that affected your givers?
Sure. So philanthropy has never been more important. We've been very blessed to have had the support of the ISTAT Foundation for around 7 years now. But we found that staying close to our funders, whether it be ISTAT or our private donors, is so important to show the impact of their giving. We were very worried, as were many organisations last year, with the onset of COVID, not having any idea that it would go for so long and have such a dramatic impact on the world. We were just so flattered and so astounded at the level of generosity that we were able to come through the pandemic. We did over 2,200 transports. That's just the Royal Flying Doctor Service, just for COVID-19. In fact, the vast majority were here in Victoria because we had the highest number of cases of COVID. And it was from support like ISTAT and our other funders that enabled us to get through that period, and has left us in a financial position where we're still able to deliver all the services that we need to on a day-to-day basis, in addition to the ones that COVID has brought to us, that has challenged us. And the costs associated with delivering healthcare with COVID is that we now can't share our road vehicles or our air vehicles with other patients because of the risk of transferring COVID from one patient to the other. We have to defog, which is sort of decontaminate our vehicles and our aircraft after every transport. So we have significant more costs, but we have been so blessed and so humbled by the generosity of people, of our donors, of our funders, and of ISTAT Foundation. They've played a very significant role in us being able to deal with all the challenges that COVID's brought.
Thank you, Naomi. I think the relationship between ISTAT and the Royal Flying Doctor Service is a very important one from our point of view as well. So thank you for being part of this presentation. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present. And from behalf of the Royal Flying Doctor Service and all Australians, thank you so much to ISTAT.
So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our next partner. I want to introduce the Mission Aviation Fellowship, and representing them is Paul Beck, the Partnership Manager. Paul serves as the Partnership Manager with the Mission Aviation Fellowship based in the United Kingdom. He has over 2 decades of experience in the international not-for-profit sector. Paul has spent time in humanitarian projects in more than 20 African countries and Asian countries. His understanding of the hardship which those in the developing world face is furthered by a master's degree in international relations and professional qualifications from the UK Institute of Fundraising. So Paul, please give us your presentation.
Thanks, Richie, and a huge thank you to everyone at the ISTAT Foundation for this opportunity to share a little bit more with you about the work of MAF and how ISTAT has helped make that possible. So, just to introduce you a little bit at the start, tell you about the origins of Mission Aviation Fellowship, or MAF as we abbreviate it to. So Mission Aviation Fellowship was set up in the aftermath of World War II by a group of Christian airmen who wanted to see the new technology of aircraft and aviation that in a way had done damage in World War II. Could we actually use that as a force for good? So that was the origins behind MAF, and that vision gave birth to an organization that today spans 24 countries around the world, where there is a fleet of over 130 aircraft, and roughly every 5 minutes or so, somewhere around the world, an MAF aircraft takes off or lands. And we're doing a incredible amount of work. So we are working with teachers, we are working with doctors, we are flying in school textbooks, we are flying in medicine, we are flying in agricultural experts, we are bringing in pipes to dig wells. There's a huge amount of humanitarian work going on with. And I want to share with you just some of the, if I go on to the next slide, you can see here, there's the locations where we're working. So primarily you're talking South America, Africa and Asia, and some out into the Asia Pacific region. So those are the different countries that we're working in. And I want to tell you today about some of the fantastic projects that the ISTAT Foundation has enabled and made it possible for MAF to be involved in. And it's a real privilege to actually to share these with you and to explain these a little bit more. So MAF's partnership with the ISTAT Foundation goes all the way back to 2016, and the very first grant made by the foundation was towards MAF's work in Chad. Now, Chad is a highly impoverished nation in the center of Africa. And just to give you a kind of feeling of the needs there, the average life expectancy in Chad is 50 years. So, that just speaks of the poverty and the hardship that people live in. And MAF has got a program flying out of the capital in N'Djamena, and we are particularly serving remote communities. And in the north of the country, that can mean communities that are cut off from reaching the capital by huge expanses of desert that can take 4, 5, 6 days to cross over land. And MAF is able to make that journey in just 2 or 3 hours. So in 2016, the foundation very kindly gave us a grant of $8,000 to upgrade the avionics in one of our Cessna 182s. This really helped us kind of embrace more safety features. You can see there's a sort of a before and after picture there. We've got the old steam gauges, as they were called, and then a much more modern digital display. And besides being far more reliable, that upgrade also freed up quite a bit of extra capacity in the aircraft. So that meant that's more vaccines that we can take with us. That's more medical equipment. That's more school textbooks. So that was a really great project and had immediate safety benefits and enabled us to serve people in that poor country of Chad. Going on to the next project, a year later, the ISTAT Foundation very kindly gave us a grant of $25,000 towards our work in South Sudan. Now, South Sudan is the world's newest country. It's just less than a decade old, but it was born out of years and years of bloody independence struggle that left infrastructure in the country absolutely shattered. There are very few roads. I think there's something like 200 miles of paved roads in the whole of South Sudan. So many people live in extremely isolated remote communities that prevents them from accessing the resources they need to develop themselves and to lift themselves out of poverty. It also means that in the event of something like a bad harvest or a drought, etc., that people can experience real hunger, children in particular. And by 2017, this situation had reached a crisis point. And MAF was able to fly in emergency food supplies, to fly in agricultural experts, to fly in doctors and nurses that could bring in kind of relief and help for children who are extremely malnourished. So really critical time there in the history of this new nation. And it was a privilege to partner with the ISTAT Foundation to be delivering that really needed famine relief at that time. Moving on to 2018, and the foundation gave a grant towards MAF's work in Arnhem Land. Now, this is a highly unusual part of the world. As you can see, Arnhem Land's in Australia, and there may be a view of, well, what are the humanitarian needs in Australia? And MAF is working amongst the Aborigines in Arnhem Land, and experience has shown that the Aborigines, it's hard to integrate them into the more kind of modern Australian society. That tends to generate a lot of mental health problems and really affects the Aborigines' well-being. The Aborigines have said they prefer to be in their own traditional homelands, and but is it possible that they could be supported in that endeavour? So Arnhem Land is an Aboriginal reserve, which is highly restricted access, and MAF has got permission from the Australian government to serve the Aboriginal communities in there. This is a location that is, I think it's twice the size of the Netherlands, just to put it into perspective. And MAF is flying, again, teachers, and we're flying in medical expertise that enables these remote Aboriginal communities to live out their kind of traditional way of life in the way that is best for them, but also means they can access the benefits of the 21st century. The ISTAT Foundation very kindly gave us a grant towards what you can see here, these pulsating landing lights, as we call them. This is a real issue in Arnhem Land because there's a lot of mangrove swamps in this territory, and the birds that come up from that pose a real danger to our aircraft. However, these landing lights act as a much greater warning, deter the birds from what we call the bird strikes, which can be dangerous, very expensive to repair. But the sunlights that were fitted, these sunspot LEDs, have a far greater life expectancy. So there's long-term cost savings as well towards that partnership there. So really grateful for the foundation's support in that. Moving along, 2019, new projects. MAF is starting in the country of Myanmar. You can see they're building a new airstrip in Chin State. No aircraft have ever served there before. There's a lot of people living in poverty. The foundation helped us buy these digital weather stations you can see on one side that are enabling us to gather a lot of atmospheric data in order to understand what the flying conditions will be like for once this airstrip in Lailempi in Chin State opens. So that was something really thankful for the ISTAT Foundation for getting us this piece of kit that's now in there, and you can see it's generating live data. Last year, of course, the world was very familiar with the coronavirus crisis, and we had a very generous donation from the foundation, which enabled us to be at the forefront of responding in the very early days of the coronavirus crisis. With the grant that the foundation made, we were able to install protective screens that separated the cockpit areas and the passenger areas from the aircraft, but also to buy in all the cleaning equipment to sterilize the aircraft for each flight, but then actually to be able in a position to go out and to fly coronavirus test kits to communities. And give you one practical example of this, it made it possible to bring test kits to the border area, so trucks could still bring food into countries like South Sudan and Uganda. That could happen safely. And also to fly personnel, medical personnel, out to these isolated communities so that they could provide training to people who are very unfamiliar with how to handle the coronavirus crisis. The most recent grant the foundation has really helped us with came last year in Papua New Guinea. Ground power units. Now, Papua New Guinea is an extremely mountainous country. There are, because there's such steep mountains, there are many, many thousands of dotted villages around Papua New Guinea, which the villagers need days to walk out there to access medicine and healthcare. So MAF has got a big program in Papua New Guinea, 9 aircraft, been working there for many years. But these ground power units bring great savings and efficiency benefits in terms of starting up the aircraft in a country where power supplies can be erratic and prolonging the life of the aircraft batteries of our Cessna 208s. So yeah, that was a tremendous investment, and we're thankful for the support of the foundation in that. And just to finish with, here's a picture of some of the team saying thank you. That is a pre-coronavirus picture, I will say, but we just want to say a huge thank you to everyone involved in the foundation for their support.
Thanks a million for that, Paul. That was a fascinating insight into the work that MAF does. I suppose the one thing that struck me was, you know, we say it all the time, but a small amount of money can have a great impact in a lot of different areas. And I think the examples that you put up there were classic in trying to demonstrate that. So thank you for that. I'd like to ask maybe a couple of questions on behalf of our audience, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I suppose, firstly, MAF have been beneficiaries of both our standard kind of annual kind of givings and also the COVID-related givings in 2020, which is great. Why is the support of ISTAT and the ISTAT Foundation and the ISTAT members of such significance to MAF?
I think for me, what's really exciting about this partnership is that this is the aviation sector getting involved. You know, we have people that very kindly support our work because they are interested in seeing medical work done and they're interested in seeing educational work done. And that's fantastic. But to have the aviation sector behind us and involved in this work really means a lot to us, because I think you guys know the impact that aviation can have. And, you know, it's a privilege that you want to be involved in that.
Okay, and how do you see MAF developing into the future? Like, it has a long history, but, you know, aviation has kind of come, I suppose, all rethought our processes in the light of COVID-19 and how we do business. How do you see it developing into the future?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a very dynamic setup that we're working here in MAF. So we are looking at new locations, places where there is very little transport infrastructure. So we're looking at a new hub in West Africa, based out of Liberia, but going into the neighboring country of Guinea. That's a new project for us. We're also exploring ways to reduce the environmental impact of what we're doing. So more efficient fuel technologies, exploring the possibility of just beginning to explore the possibility of electric aircraft. So there's a lot going on, and it's really just great to see these happening in this highly changing world that we live in.
And finally, just to close off, the COVID-19 pandemic that we're just hopefully coming out of now. Has it raised awareness for MAF, or has it acted as a negative in terms of your funding ability?
I think, if I'm honest, it's been a double-edged sword, because it has made it more challenging for us to hold the kind of public events where we do face-to-face fundraising. And we've missed the opportunity to go out and to meet people and to be able to share with them the exciting work that's going on with MAF. But at the same time, we are being approached by a lot of governments in countries where we have aircraft that want us to help getting coronavirus vaccines out, and they see us as a means to deliver that last mile, to be that last mile delivery service, to maintain the cold chain that a lot of vaccines need when being transported in a country. So that's opening doors for us with the authorities in countries, and we believe that in the long term that there'll be some deeper partnerships that come through that. So that's an exciting development in these difficult times. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And as we all know, the last mile is the critical element in terms of delivering a service. So appreciate your time, and appreciate the help that you have given us to help you. So we look forward to that partnership moving on into the future.
Well, thank you, and thank you to everybody involved in the foundation. It's wonderful to work with you guys and to see the difference that's being made around the world. Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce our next presenter. Steve Smith is the president and CEO of Airlink. Under Steve's leadership, Airlink revenue has impacted and grown more than tenfold, delivering hundreds of thousands of pounds of relief cargo, as well as deploying thousands of responders and medical professionals, search teams, rescue teams, and other key humanitarian actors from across the globe. So over to Steve for his presentation.
Thanks so much, Richie. I'm really delighted to join you today to have this opportunity to talk about Airlink, the work we do, and the long association we've had with the ISTAT Foundation. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with Airlink, we are a disaster response and humanitarian organization, a non-profit, and we coordinate logistics and secure free and heavily subsidized air transport to a pre-screen network of over 120 non-profit humanitarian aid and disaster relief partners. That last part concerning pre-screening is critical. It's one of the things that makes Airlink a force multiplier, but more of that in a moment. Our strategic role today is really about looking at the logistics for a disaster. You know, there were some studies done many years ago, and of all the funding that's raised in a response, in a disaster, 80% of that, so all the adverts you see on TV of kids and families you're trying to help, 80% of that funding goes to some area of the supply chain. And what's really sad is that 60% of what arrives in the first few weeks are often the wrong things. And so we're even seeing some of that, at the moment with some of the responses we're involved in. It's widely recognized that the humanitarian system cannot keep up, and they're really looking for expertise from the commercial sector. And NGOs don't always collaborate as they should. And so we can, and we really do help here. And this is really part of the power of Airlink. So now you might not be aware of the fact, but in late 2009, Airlink was formed by leadership and volunteers within the ISTAT Foundation. When you look at the birth of our organization over 10 years, it reads like some sort of strange adventure novel. A group of ISTAT members deciding to do something to help others in dire circumstances with the power and speed of aviation. Now, those members are still active, and I speak to a lot of them on a regular basis. But I would say that when we look at our most impactful support from the ISTAT community and how they've helped us over the years, it really does come down to the passion and commitment of each and every person that's volunteered their time, money, connections, and really to help us operate in the most impactful way that we can. And so with an idea and some air transportation, not only to mention a strong sense of purpose, Airlink undertook its first mission in 2010 when a 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck Port-au-Prince in Haiti. Airlink joined forces with global NGOs and commercial and private aviation to coordinate the movement of more than 2,000 doctors and nurses and more than 40 shipments of aid, totaling over £500,000 in terms of weight. That was not only our first response, but it also turned out to be one of our largest ever. Just to help remind you of the scale of this disaster and its terrible human impact, I would like to share this video. Since that first mission, Airlink has transported more than 7,400 responders and approximately £4 million of humanitarian aid by air. This equates to nearly 13 million in transportation costs that we've saved nonprofit organizations, and more importantly, we have delivered hope and compassion. In the midst of disasters, passenger and cargo airlines count on Airlink as a facilitator and logistics expert that understands both nonprofit humanitarian and airline needs. And Airlink is an expert hub through which carriers can efficiently support the humanitarian and disaster relief community. The airlines know that by working with Airlink and its partners, there will be minimal disruption to their core business operations, which dramatically increases the amount airlines and air freight companies are willing to donate and support. It also speeds up the planning and delivery process for arranging the movement of humanitarian assistance and cuts down response times. Our NGO and nonprofit partners are, as I said earlier, pre-screened. One critical requirement of the pre-approval process is that any organization we support on a particular response, whether with tickets or cargo capacity, must have a very clear last mile distribution plan in place. This is critical to the efficiency of disaster response, but it's also part of that understanding we have with the airlines that means they're willing to work with us. For their part, our NGOs and nonprofits know that the cost of air travel are not going to be a prohibitive factor when deciding whether and how to respond. They can devote more of their resources to service delivery and the procurement of humanitarian supplies. They also know that they have a supporting partner able to remove as much of the burden of coordinating and shipping their people and inventory, whilst also having to spend time and resources developing their own relationships with the airlines. Or, as would be more likely, desperately run around at the moment of trying to secure discounted air travel. And so this is why we often refer to Airlink and its role as a force multiplier. Never more so was this concept tested or needed than was the case in 2020. It is one of the tragedies of this field of work that your most momentous years are invariably built on the back of other people's difficulties. And that was 2020. COVID-19 dramatically changed our response profile. In previous years, we've seen a greater demand for air tickets as opposed to air cargo space. We responded to an unprecedented hurricane season in 2019, and that year sent a record number of relief workers, but then had to almost completely pivot to cargo for COVID. In early 2020, we launched a 4-phase program, Aviation Cares. The CARES is Coordinated Air Response for Emergency Supplies. It really had 2 objectives: to generate funding and in-kind support to meet the rising and changing demand for the initial surge, vulnerable communities around the world, supporting healthcare systems, and the lag in vaccine distribution to low-income nations, which is all happening right now. But the second part was really to champion the efforts of the aviation industry during a difficult time. We all know the challenges facing the passenger airlines right now, but one thing that's not all that well known is that they still go above and beyond in supporting humanitarian situations around the world. It's really important, and I think it's a key role for Airlink to make sure we champion that, because we wouldn't be able to do what we do without that support. In 2020 alone, Airlink provided free and subsidized flights for 638 responders, helped move 239,000 pounds of supplies, including over 10 million pieces of personal protective equipment, and saved our NGO and non-profit partners almost $3 million in transportation costs. We provided aid and support programs that reached over 5 million people. That's roughly the same populations of Chicago, Dallas, Seattle, and Boston combined. We responded to 23 events, supporting dozens of individual NGO missions on behalf of 49 NGOs and disaster relief nonprofits. And they were supported by, and they worked with 17 airlines, all despite the backdrop of COVID-19 that rocked the aviation sector. We're currently responding around the globe, not only to COVID-19, but to the volcano in St. Vincent and Grenadines, to the Tigray conflict, Hurricanes Eta and Iota in Guatemala. And since February of 2020, Airlink has served over 30 countries, helping 23 NGOs and engaged 10 air carriers to provide over 2 million in transportation relief to a diverse group of NGOs that have provided 5 million people with medical care, 500,000 people with water, sanitation, and hygiene, 240,000 people with food, and 10,000 with shelter. Now, a big focus for Airlink is India. We're coordinating with 30 NGOs across 40 different shipments, mostly oxygen related, some protective gear. Now we're pulling together the carriers to support United, Qatar, Cathay, 9 carriers in total, many of them helping and have been helping for some time, whether it's through Airlink or not. And we're moving shipments from the US, from Canada, from China, and from the UK into Mumbai, Kerala, and other states in India. We're speaking with global forwarders and also forwarders in India. And I would like to mention, we work very closely and have a good partner in Flexport. Logistics is absolutely critical right now. It's actually critical in all humanitarian situations, but it's largely not tremendously well understood. So with that, I want to thank ISTAT and the ISTAT Foundation and the ISTAT members for all of their support, past, present, and future. We really could not do it without you.
Thank you, Steve. It was a really interesting presentation. I was planning on asking you a range of questions, but I think for the purposes of this, what I'd like to do, one, is mention that last week, as you know, the ISTAT Foundation has stepped up to provide some interim help focused on India. So the potential giving that we hope will be deployed rapidly through Airlink is, if we can get to the maximum, it could be up to $150,000. So we're delighted to be able to help Airlink in delivering resources into India. So thank you for kind of working with us on that. And I think
Thank you.
for the purpose of this conversation, I'd really just like to kind of focus on India itself, because it is such a big crisis and it is immediate, and everything else really dwarfs in relation to it at the moment. So looking at the response in India at the moment, can you talk to us about the complexities of an operation like this? Like, I've delivered aircraft into India, I've worked in India, and it's not the most straightforward environment to work in. But just maybe share with our audience about the complexities that you face in delivering aid.
Sure, and thanks so much, Richie, and thanks so much for the support that the foundation you've given us. That's really going to be really significant for us. Yeah, you know, India is tremendously complex because, typically speaking, humanitarian nonprofits, humanitarian aid is not something that's allowed in. And so where we find ourselves is, yes, there's lots of stories of governments flying in aid. You can see on the news that oxygen is a significant problem, the oxygen concentrators, the oxygen canisters. But what we are seeing is that there are a lot of NGOs, a lot of response organizations that are still trying to find partners on the ground to move things in. And I think actually India, while maybe a tricky place to operate most of the time, appear to be doing a good job in terms of clearing things and getting things through. However, where we are right now is that we're still in an early response phase. Granted, I know we're a few weeks in beyond the initial setup of the response, but there are a lot of organizations that are finding resources that are sending those things in. You know, there are some complexities that you wouldn't even think of. You know, we were speaking with our forwarder the other day. Ground trucking in the US is a problem, right? To coordinate and pre-position cargo into airports, and was causing a significant delay, right? That industry's been struggling for a long time, the ground trucking. And so, you know, we had, it was a few weeks ago now, but we had May Day in China, where things shut down and everything shuts down for a week. And so all of these things have a knock-on effect. And I think that, you know, while there are many NGOs trying to respond, one of the roles that Airlink plays is as a convener, not for just NGOs to airlines, but for NGOs together and to have them work together. And so we now have been hosting a weekly call to talk about what is your NGO doing, this specifically for the NGOs. What is your NGO doing? What support do they need? How can we learn lessons from organizations that have been able to move things in and been able to distribute them? Because there are different regulations. Oxygen supplies are approved and are without customs or duties, but protective gear is not, right? And so there's a lot of complexity around moving these things. And we're making some great progress. We've got some good partners that are helping us with, I think I mentioned United doing a lot, DHL, Qatar, and, you know, Atlas Air, Polar Air, Cargo are being really helpful. So, yeah, I mean, it's something that, and the thing is that while there's a lot of focus on it within the media right now, although that's already starting to wane a little bit, we will be there for a long time. Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas, kind of a different situation. But we actually sent our most recent, we're calling cohort of responders, a few weeks ago. And so that's 18 months later, right? And so that's, you know, we're going to be in and around India for a long time. We're seeing now spread out to Nepal and to Bangladesh. That has other challenges: high airport, short runway, smaller aircraft needed. So yeah, really good question. Really complex.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in the interest of not taking the focus away from India at the moment, I was going to talk about a couple of other different things, but I think it's important that we as a community focus on India and the relief we can give in India. So, you know, certainly we will be promoting it on our social media platforms, and we wish you all the best in delivering the aid that's badly needed out there. So thank you very much, Steve, for being part of this. Thank you.
No, thanks so much, Richie. And I would just like to add, I mean, we have no other partner like ISTAT. I mean, not only did ISTAT give birth to Airlink, it has consistently and persistently supported our work over the years. And if you look at really anything that Airlink has achieved, somewhere, somehow, some way, there's a member of ISTAT behind it. And, you know, and this happens organically and over its own sort of timeline. But I just want to, you know, thank you. Yes, we're independent and, you know, and we respond all around the world, but we really are proud of our heritage from ISTAT and the ISTAT Foundation. We couldn't do it without you.
So just to wrap up, thank you for joining us in the first of the series of ISTAT online initiatives, outlining the work of the Humanitarian Program and its volunteers. We hope that you've enjoyed the presentations from our partners. We've used a sample of the organizations that have received humanitarian grant from the Foundation. So you've heard from Gabrielle from the World Food Programme USA, Naomi on behalf of the Royal Flying Doctors Service in Australia, Paul from Mission Aviation Fellowship, and Steve from Airlink. We hope that you'll join us for the next in the series of this initiative, and it'll be coming from the education and intern groups. So thank you very much indeed, and we hope you enjoy it.